Montana Territory, early spring of 1881. The wind carried snowmelt off the mountains, and the scent of pine through the valley when Adelaide Archer stepped off the stagecoach with a suitcase in one hand and a stitched-up scar on her belly that the doctor said meant she would never carry a child. The town of Havre was still small, just a few streets and a short rail line, but it was enough. Enough distance from St. Louis, enough quiet, enough room to breathe. She had not come west to heal. She had come west because there was nothing left for her in Missouri. No husband he had left the day after the doctor gave the news. No family her parents had passed 2 winters ago. Just a bit of inheritance money and a name she still carried like a badge, Mrs. Archer. The boarding house was clean, warm, and quiet. The woman who ran it, Miss Heller, did not ask questions. Adelaide liked that. She unpacked her books and her sewing kit, and 2 days after arriving, she walked to the schoolhouse and offered to teach. 3 weeks later, she was teaching 10 children how to read and add. It was when the 11th and 12th showed up 2 dust-covered boys with empty hands and quiet eyes that everything shifted. They arrived in the middle of a lesson. Adelaide looked up from the chalkboard to find them standing just inside the door. No shoes. One had a bruise on his cheek. The older one, maybe 7, held the younger's hand with a grip too tight for boys that small. "I am sorry we are late," the older one said. "We did not know where the school was. We just got here." Adelaide stepped forward, heart thudding. "Where are your parents?" "They are gone," the younger whispered. "We came on the train and then walked." She knelt. "What are your names?" "Dawson and Drew." Her throat tightened. "How old are you?" "I am 7. He is 5. She looked at their eyes. The older one had not blinked once. The younger clung to his sleeve like he was the only solid thing in the world. Adelaide stood. "You are not late. You are right on time. Come sit." That night she took them to the boarding house. Miss Heller gave her a look but did not argue. Adelaide washed the boys, fed them, tucked them into quilts, and sat awake long after they slept, watching the fire crackle, wondering what came next. The next morning, she went to the sheriff's office to report them. The sheriff scratched his beard and said they could stay with her until someone from the county orphanage came. "Could be a week, could be 2, he said. Adelaide nodded. "They can stay." She left with a paper in her hand and the weight of 2 small lives added to her own. That afternoon, she met him. The sun was lowering behind the hills when her school bell rang and a tall man leaned against the post outside the door, wiping dust from his hat. He was all shoulders and worn denim, the sun bronzing his skin and a rope slung over one hip. His horse, tied to a nearby tree, looked just as tired as he did. "Are you the school teacher?" he asked. "Yes." He looked past her. "I heard you took in 2 boys, Dawson and Drew." She stepped out into the light. "Who are you?" "My name's Nolan Avery," he said. "I was on a cattle job down in Bozeman. I came home and my sister was gone. She left a letter, said she could not take care of them anymore." Adelaide's hand tightened around the doorframe. "You are their uncle," he nodded. "They are all I got left." She studied him carefully. His voice was low, steady. His eyes were the same warm brown as Dawson's. There was sorrow there, but not panic. She believed him. "They are safe," she said. His shoulders dropped a little. "I am grateful. Come back tomorrow," she added. "Let them sleep tonight." He nodded once, then looked at her again. "Thank you." The next morning, Nolan came early. The boys ran to him. Both wrapped their arms around his waist, held on tight. He knelt and hugged them, rough hands gentle on their backs. "I am here now," he whispered. "I promise." Adelaide stood back, watching. Something in her chest cracked open. Later, while the boys played, Nolan helped her sweep the schoolhouse floor. "They told me I would never bear children," she said simply. Not looking up, he paused. "I am sorry." "I am not." He glanced at her. "I would not have met them otherwise." He leaned on the handle of the broom, quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If you cannot have children, then we will raise orphans together." Adelaide blinked. "What?" "I meant what I said." His gaze was steady. "I do not think it is wrong to want to build a family with someone who already loves the kids." "Mr. Avery, Nolan." "Nolan," she said slowly, the name foreign but not unpleasant in her mouth. "We just met." "I know," he said, "but I see how you look at them. I see how they look at you. And I have not seen a woman care like that since my sister, before everything went wrong." Adelaide folded her hands. "I do not know what I am yet." "That is all right," he said. I will wait. I am not going anywhere. In the days that followed, Nolan stayed. He helped fix the porch at the schoolhouse, taught Drew how to tie a knot, showed Dawson how to saddle a pony. He brought fresh eggs from a neighbor's ranch, carved a new desk for the classroom. Adelaide watched him laugh with the boys, watched them lean into his arms like roots to water. She found herself smiling more, sleeping better. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the boys chased fireflies in the yard, Nolan sat beside her on the steps of the boarding house. I was not looking for this, she said. Me neither, he said. But here we are, she glanced at him, then back at the boys. They need us. I need you too, he said, his voice quiet. She turned. His face was close. His eyes were warm. She reached out and touched his hand. I am scared, she confessed. He closed his fingers around hers. I am not. And just like that, something settled. Not everything was fixed, but something had begun, something strong, something real. And Adelaide, for the first time in a long time, let herself believe in it. The thaw came slow that year. April dragged its heels through the valley, and the creek behind the schoolhouse ran high with runoff. Dawson took to watching it in the afternoons, thumb hooked into the strap of his overalls, brow furrowed like he was working out something too big to say. Drew stayed closer, half shadow and half child, always with one hand on Adelaide's skirt or Nolan's coat hem. One morning, Adelaide found a paper folded neatly on her desk, ink still fresh. Dawson's name signed careful and proud at the bottom. It was a story about a bear cub who'd lost his way but found a home in a cabin guarded by a tall pine and a woman who read books out loud. It was simple, but it held a kind of truth that made her sit down without meaning to. When Nolan showed up that evening with a tin of salted pork and a hand-wrapped parcel of honeycomb, she handed him the story without a word. He read it in silence, leaning against the doorframe while the boys picked burrs from their socks beside the hearth. He's figuring it out, Nolan said, folding the paper again, in his own way. I know, she said quietly. They both are. He slid the story into his coat pocket without asking. She didn't stop him. The next day, Miss Heller caught Adelaide just before supper, wiping her hands on her apron and studying her in that frank, unsentimental way she had when news needed delivering. There's a woman from the county coming up on Tuesday, she said. About the boys, Adelaide nodded. I expected that. She'll want proof the arrangement's proper, that they've got a stable home. I understand. Miss Heller hesitated. Do you? Adelaide met her eyes. They're not leaving with anyone else. That night, she asked Nolan to walk with her after the boys were asleep. They took the back path through the tall grass, where the moon laid silver across the slope and the air smelled of wet bark and distant lilac. County's coming Tuesday, she said. I figured, he replied. I've no legal claim. You've got something better. You stayed when no one else did. She stopped walking. If they ask what we are to each other, what would you say? He paused, then said, I'd say I'm building something with a woman I trust and we're doing it for the right reasons. The wind moved through the grass like a hush. I'm not ready to marry, she said, honest and unflinching. I didn't ask, but I'm not walking away from this. He stepped closer. Neither am I. She took his hand. It was rough, calloused, too big around hers, but it felt like something she could hold on to. I want them to stay, she said. They will. They walked back slow, their hands joined, the night cool against their skin. Inside, the boys were curled up like pups under the quilt, warm and safe. Nolan slept in the shed behind the house after that. Said it was temporary, said it was fine. Adelaide brought him coffee in the mornings, and he brought her kindlings split down the grain so it caught easy. Tuesday arrived with gray skies and a wagon kicking up dust along the road. The county woman wore gloves and a pinched expression, but she listened. Adelaide told her everything, how they came, what they'd been through, what was being built now, brick by quiet brick. Nolan didn't say much, but when he did, it was plain and sure. They call her Miss Adelaide, he said, but they treat her like something more than that. The woman didn't smile. She made notes. She asked for signatures. She walked the room, looked at the boys, asked them questions they didn't want to answer, then she left. They didn't speak of it that night. There was nothing to do but wait. The letter came a week later, folded and sealed, carried by the same man who delivered flour and newsprint. Adelaide opened it on the porch while Nolan stood beside her, his hand resting light on her shoulder. The boys could stay, under temporary guardianship pending review. She exhaled slowly, then passed the letter to Nolan. He read it, folded it again, then looked at her. "They're ours to raise," he said. She nodded, tears gathering but not falling. That evening they ate on the porch. Drew sat on Nolan's lap, Dawson leaned against Adelaide's side. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. Later, after the boys were asleep, Nolan lingered by the door. "I've got a piece of land," he said. "North of here, not much, but the soil's good. There's a barn standing, and I can build the rest." She looked up at him. "You're asking me to come?" "No," he said gently. "I'm asking if we can build it together." She stood, stepped into the doorway where the lamplight reached his face. She looked at him a long time, then touched his collar, smoothing it once. "Yes," she said. He nodded, nothing more. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did he. But for the first time, they dreamed the same dream. By May, the earth had softened enough for planting, and the first shoots of green pushed through the soil behind the schoolhouse where Adelaide and the boys had turned a patch of ground into rows. Dawson took to watering each hill with a seriousness that made Nolan grin when he passed by, arms full of lumber pulled from the edge of his land. The house he was building rose in slow pieces, first the floor beams, then the frame, each timber cut by hand. Each nail hammered in with the same steady rhythm he used to calm Drew when night terrors gripped him. Adelaide came on Sundays with biscuits and boiled eggs wrapped in linen, the boys trailing behind with string-tied bundles and questions about how walls stood without falling. That Sunday, Nolan waited at the edge of the clearing with sawdust on his shirt and a line of sweat darkening the collar. "You've got more progress than I expected," Adelaide said, setting her basket on a stump. "I bartered fence wire for help from a neighbor," Nolan said, wiping his hands on a rag. "He helped me lift the ridge beam yesterday. Said he owed me from 2 winters back." Drew ran ahead to climb the porch joists, and Dawson trailed behind him, counting knots in the wood aloud. "Does the neighbor have a wife?" she asked, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Not anymore," Nolan said. "She passed in childbirth last fall. Left him with a daughter just older than Drew." Adelaide's voice dropped. "Is he managing?" "He's trying, same as anyone." She turned to look at the beams. "The porch faces east." "I figured you'd like to see the morning," he said. "I do." She stepped onto the frame where the floor would be and stood beside him, watching the trees sway along the edge of the clearing. "I brought you something," she said, reaching into the basket. "It's not much." He opened the cloth and found a small book, the cover worn, the pages carefully sewn back into the spine with blue thread. "I used to read it with my mother," she said. "You said you couldn't sleep sometimes. Thought it might help." He turned the book in his hands, thumb tracing the stitched seam. "You always bring me something I didn't know I needed." "I think we're building more than a house," she said. He looked at her then, the space between them narrowing without movement. "I know we are." That night, Nolan rode back to the boarding house with them. The boys had fallen asleep before supper, their faces sun-flushed and their fingertips still stained from planting carrots. He lingered on the porch, the lamp indoors casting a soft glow through the lace curtain. "I've been thinking about the school year ending," he said. Adelaide leaned against the rail. 2 more weeks, then I'll be with them full time." "I know you've got your own work," he said slowly. "But come the end of summer, I'd like you to move into the house. I'll finish by then. And if you're not ready for vows, I'll wait, but I want to live beside you in full, not just in pieces." She didn't answer right away. A breeze moved her hair and she watched it settle across her shoulder. "I'm not afraid of vows," she said finally. "I just want them to mean something more than duty." "They will," he said. "Not because we have to, but because we choose to." Her voice was steady. "Then we'll do it in the fall, after the harvest. When the boys are settled." He smiled, not with his mouth, but in the way his shoulders eased and his eyes stayed on hers. "All right." Inside, Drew stirred once in his sleep, murmured a name that wasn't real, and turned over. Nolan reached for her hand. She let him take it. It was not the first time, but it felt new all the same. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "I've been writing to the county," she said. "Asking to make the guardianship permanent. You didn't tell me. I wanted to be sure I had the right to ask." He didn't let go. You've had that from the moment they laid their heads in your lap. She looked down, quiet for a beat. If we're going to do this right, I want to carry their names beside yours. You will, he said. You already do. They just haven't learned how to say it yet. The moon climbed slow over the ridge, casting pale light across the porch. The sounds of the town had quieted, and in their place came the steady creak of the rocking chair Miss Heller had left out front, and the rustle of cottonwood leaves just beginning to bud. Adelaide turned toward the door. "There's a shirt of yours I need to mend," she said. "I've got time," he said. "All the time you need." He didn't follow her in right away. He stood there a while longer, listening to the wind, the soft hush of his future settling into place. The house was nearly done by the first week of July. The rafters were in, the floorboards sanded smooth, and Adelaide had stitched gingham curtains in the evenings after the boys slept, her needle moving in long, quiet arcs while Nolan carved drawer handles from cottonwood. It was a home now, not just lumber and nails, but the shape of something that would hold them all. That Sunday, after supper, Adelaide stood in the doorway with Dawson beside her, both watching Nolan drive the final hinge into the kitchen cabinet. Drew sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing a smooth stone along the edge of the hearth Nolan had built from field rock and mortar. "I want to help next time," Dawson said, arms crossed. "You're helping now," Nolan said, setting the hammer aside. "You're watching. I want to build something. Then I'll show you how to fit a plank tomorrow," he replied, "but you've got to listen close. What'll teach you if you pay attention." Adelaide turned her gaze to Nolan. "My father used to say that about horses," she said. "Said every one of them tells you what kind of day they're having if you're quiet enough to hear it." He sat back on his heels, wiped his hands on his trousers. "You ever break one?" "A bay mare when I was 17, she said. "Took a full week and she near kicked my ribs in. But by the end, she let me braid her mane without a rope. You'll fit in fine here." She knelt to gather Drew into her lap. He'd fallen asleep upright, head resting against her knee. His breath was steady, one thumb curled beneath his chin. "I got a letter," Nolan said after a pause. "From the county. They'll be sending someone to finalize the guardianship. Said we'd done everything right so far." Adelaide looked up. "When?" "Middle of August," she nodded slowly. "That gives us time." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "Time for what?" "To teach them what staying means," she said. "They've known enough leaving." The next morning, while Nolan rode north to pick up a hand mill from a farmer he'd bartered with, Adelaide stayed behind with the boys. She let them pick raspberries along the fence line and showed Dawson how to mend a button on his shirt with a thimble and tight thread. Near midday, she led them to the stream behind the house, where the water bent sharp around a thicket of chokecherry. They waded in up to their knees, clothes soaked and laughter echoing against the trees. Drew held her hand the whole time. That evening, Nolan returned with the mill balanced behind his saddle and a book tucked under his arm. "I thought of you," he said, handing it to Adelaide. "It's not new, but the pages are clean." She ran her fingertips over the cover, a collection of folk stories from the Blackfoot and Crow. "Where'd you find it?" "Traded a sack of oats for it with a woman in Havre. Said she taught her kids using the same tales." She opened to the first page, read a few lines, then closed it and looked up at him. "You keep finding what I didn't know was missing." He smiled, quiet and sure, and reached over to take the book back, only to place it carefully on the shelf he'd built beside the hearth. That night, they sat outside while the boys slept. Fire coals glowed low in the pit Nolan had dug beside the porch. The air was cool, but not cold. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and he offered his coat without a word. "Do you ever think about what you would have done if they hadn't come?" she asked. He stared out into the dark, the outline of the trees just enough to make out the shape of the pines. "I would have kept moving," he said. "Same as I always had, but I don't think I would have built anything, not like this." She shifted closer. "You think it would have been easier, maybe. But it wouldn't have been honest." She leaned back against the post. "I used to think I'd live in books and quiet rooms for the rest of my life, somewhere no one would ask what I lost. They never asked out loud," he said gently, "but they saw." She turned to him then, her voice low. "I don't feel broken anymore. You never were." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. The quiet wrapped around them like something earned. Later, when she rose to go inside, he stood with her. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it, their palms fitting together like something long practiced. The house behind them stood solid in the dark. There were no walls between them now, only the rhythm of things being made whole. The August sun bore down steady, but the house held cool inside, the thick plaster walls. Nolan had packed himself, holding the heat at bay. By then, the shelves were full, the beds were built, and the door hinges no longer creaked. The scent of dried sage drifted in from the bunch Adelaide had tied above the stove, and Drew had taken to singing to himself while he swept, tuneless and soft. The county agent arrived 4 days earlier than expected. A man this time, lean and red-cheeked, with a ledger tucked beneath one arm and a pocket watch he checked often, as though time itself might shift if he looked away too long. He asked questions as he walked through the house, nodding at the boys' sleeping space, the schoolbooks lined along the shelf, the stacked jars of preserved beans. When he paused in the doorway of the kitchen, Adelaide was smoothing flour across the dough for the noon bread. "You're not their blood," he said, not unkindly but without apology. "No," she answered. "I'm something steadier." Nolan stepped in from the porch then, sleeves rolled, a splinter still caught in the fold of his wrist. "She's raised them every day since they came," he said. "They don't ask for anyone else." That night, after the man rode off, they didn't speak of what would come in the mail. They ate by lamplight, the boys drowsy with the heat, and after the last dish had been dried, Nolan reached for Adelaide's hand and held it a moment longer than usual. The next morning she woke before dawn, the room still blue with shadow. She found Nolan outside, already saddled, one boot in the stirrup. "There's a widow near Bear Paw," he said, "due to have her calf pulled. Her boy rode out last night looking for help." Adelaide nodded. "You'll be back before supper," he adjusted the bridle. "Soon as the work's done." She stepped down from the porch, bare feet in the grass, and handed him the cloth-wrapped biscuit she'd tucked under her apron. "Take care of your back." He leaned down, kissed her forehead in answer, and rode out into the rising light. By the time he returned, dusk had settled, and the smoke from the stovepipe curled steady into the sky. The boys were asleep. Adelaide met him at the fence where his horse stood lathered and tired. "You stayed longer than you meant to," she said. "The cow was breeched," he replied. "Took 3 hours and a length of rope." She took the lead and walked the mare toward the shed. "She all right now?" "Both of them are." Inside, he shed his coat and washed with the water she'd warmed for him. She handed him a clean shirt and didn't look away when he winced from the pull across his shoulder. "You need rest," she said. "You do too." They stood in the kitchen with only the lamp between them, the quiet of the house folded close around their shoulders. "I wrote a letter," she said. "To who?" "The preacher in Havre." "I asked if he'd come here near the end of the month." Nolan wiped his hands, then turned toward her. "Why?" "Because I don't want to wait for the county to tell us we're a family." He didn't answer right away. Then, gently, "You're sure? I'm not a woman who does things halfway," she said. "Neither are you." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Then let's do it our way." The wedding was held beneath the pine near the stream, where the water turned over stones and the soil held firm. Miss Heller brought a pie, and the carpenter from 2 homesteads over stood as witness. Dawson wore a collar too tight for his liking, and Drew clutched the folded handkerchief Adelaide had sewn for him the night before. They said no vows beyond what they meant. Nolan took her hand, and she took his name, and the boys stood between them, sun-browned and grinning. After, they sat on the porch as the sky turned violet and the first stars came out. The boys were curled on a quilt near the steps, full from supper, heads resting against each other. Adelaide leaned into Nolan's side, her voice quiet. "I never thought I'd end up here," he kissed her temple. "Neither did I, but I'm glad I did," he wrapped his arm around her. "Me too." Years passed as they always do. The house aged gently. The boys grew tall. Dawson took to carpentry beside Nolan, steady hands and a mind for angles. Drew liked ink and paper, and Adelaide taught him to write stories that made Nolan laugh until his eyes watered. They built more rooms as needed. A barn, a smokehouse, a life. And they never once turned from each other, even in the hard seasons. They did not speak often of the years before. They didn't need to. Everything they had now whispered of what they'd overcome. And when the first frost brushed the windows one late October, Nolan came in from the dark and found Adelaide by the stove, a shawl around her shoulders and a cup of tea in her hands. He leaned down, kissed her cheek, and said, "It's good, isn't it? The way it all turned out." She smiled, leaned into him, and whispered back, "Better than I ever hoped." And it was.